Couple of shocking things. Do you know Americans now have over 110 million cases of venereal disease, and 20 million young adults got it last year. 20 million. Okay. Well, the other story we've got for you is like something out of science fiction. Long trains full of armored vehicles, personnel carriers with armor. What are they for? The Army going into battle against the enemy? They're used by Homeland Security against us. Ronald Reagan said the most fearful statement in the English language is, "I'm from the government and I'm here to help you."
Oh boy, I totally agree.
Imagine what Homeland Security is doing. It's just awful. But we're going to talk about how much ammunition they're stockpiling. Who are they going to shoot? Us? Terry?
Well, these moves are coming as people are also asking about how drones might be used in the skies above America. Jennifer Wishon has the story from Washington.
As private gun and ammunition sales skyrocket, Uncle Sam is buying too, in bulk. The Department of Homeland Security is purchasing 1.6 billion rounds of ammunition, enough ammo for 24 years of the Iraq War. The department says it will be used for training and arming Border Patrol and other law enforcement agents. But the agency's buying spree is fueling sinister theories that have gone viral. Some predict a government arms race against Americans. In a letter, California Republican Congressman Doug LaMalfa and 13 of his colleagues asked Secretary Janet Napolitano why ammunitions purchases on such an astonishing scale are taking place. And as the Obama administration works to ban so-called assault rifles and high-capacity magazines, LaMalfa questions the agency's timing. The extraordinary level of ammunition purchases made by Homeland Security, he writes, seems to have created an extreme shortage of ammunition to the point where many gun owners are unable to purchase any. At least one federal official says buying in bulk makes sense because it's cheaper, and some Homeland Security training centers go through 15 million rounds a year. The National Rifle Association addressed the rumors and concerns and concluded there isn't any reason for worry. There are more than enough threats to the Second Amendment to keep gun owners busy. There's no need to invent additional threats to our rights. But it is easy for many people to question the government. According to a recent poll from Pew Research, 73% have little confidence in the government, and more than half of Americans say the government is a threat to their rights. Adding to the mistrust of some Americans is the increasing expectation that drones will soon pepper American airspace over homes and businesses. Drone technology becomes more stealth every day as state governments and Congress scramble to find ways to protect privacy and ensure Americans they won't become targets of armed drones on American soil.
The president says, "I haven't killed anyone yet." He goes on to say, "And I have no intention of killing Americans, but I might."
Senator Rand Paul became a hero of sorts to many when he drew attention to the president's policy of using drones with his famous filibuster of the confirmation of now CIA Director John Brennan. Paul wanted assurances that the federal government wouldn't use them to fire upon Americans on American soil.
Are we so complacent with our rights that we would allow a president to say he might kill Americans?
Now lawmakers from both parties are debating how to use drones. They're trying to balance the benefits, like finding missing persons, against potential costs, like the government watching you without you ever knowing it.
There really is a subjective element of harm to living in a society where you feel like you're under surveillance.
So presumably at some point you could have one the size of a mosquito that has a battery that operates for weeks, and you could have a mosquito following you around and not be aware of it.
There are already images online of a mosquito drone being developed by the National Security Agency and them trying to figure out what technology they can put on it to make small enough to put on it.
It's uncharted territory that has many Americans on edge and suspicious about their government's motives. Jennifer Wishon, CBN News.
It's amazing that the Homeland Security is letting the border guards not get overtime, and therefore there's certain gaps in our security fence that lets undocumented workers come across the border from Mexico. But at the same time, they're buying huge amounts. I mean, you see the pictures of these personnel carriers, armed combat-type personnel carriers on railroad cars lined up by the hundreds. And you say, who are they going to fight against? Who are they going to fight against? We're the taxpayers. We're the people. Well, Americans are also facing another major national debate, this time over same-sex marriage. Wendy Griffith has more on those important cases about marriage at the Supreme Court. Wendy.
Thank you, Pat. Well, the Supreme Court isn't likely to rule on those gay marriage cases until June, but those rulings aren't likely to end the debate and the deep divide over the future of marriage and the family in America. John Jessup has the story from Washington.
While public support for gay marriage has shifted over the last several years, the laws on the books tell a different story. 30 states now have laws banning same-sex marriage, and only 9 states and the District of Columbia allow it. The Supreme Court's second look at the issue focused on the constitutionality of the Federal Defense of Marriage Act, usually called DOMA. The 1996 law says the federal government only recognizes marriage as a legal union between one man and one woman as husband and wife. 83-year-old Edie Windsor wants the court to strike it down.
I felt we were very respected, and I think it's going to be good.
She says the government treated her unfairly when she had to pay $360,000 in estate taxes after the death of her same-sex partner of 44 years, taxes a heterosexual spouse wouldn't have to pay. After her day in court, she told supporters why it's important for the government to recognize the marriages of gays and lesbians, and she says the word marriage is key.
The magic word, for anybody who doesn't understand why we want it and why we need it, okay, it is magic.
While some states already recognize same-sex marriages, the federal government, under DOMA, does not. And that can be important because marital status affects more than 1,100 federal laws, from taxes to Social Security to health benefits for federal employees. But opponents say much more is at stake with DOMA and the other case before the court, Proposition 8, the California voter-approved measure that supports traditional marriage and bans gay marriage. Opponents say legalizing it would not only redefine marriage itself, it will also threaten the traditional family.
God gave us the gift of marriage between one man and one woman because through them, life is born, and that's the way God created us to be.
And opponents say gay marriage will jeopardize the religious freedoms of individuals, churches, businesses, and even some of those called to serve their country in the military.
And puts at risk the religious liberties of duly authorized clergy, and particularly those who are under the authority of the federal government, such as the hundreds of military chaplains in this country.
The court's not expected to make its decision until June. While it looks like the justices may strike down DOMA, the court has surprised observers before. In the meantime, some believe whatever the decision, it's important to bridge the growing divide.
I think it's important that we find ways, as those supporting same-sex marriage, to reach out and be in conversation with the people who oppose it.
And that conversation is likely to continue, especially if the court decides not to decide.
When the dust has settled and the crowds are gone, the court could ultimately choose to sidestep a controversial ruling based on standing, a legal technicality. And if it chooses to do so, the debate over marriage, both legally and morally, will certainly continue indefinitely. John Jessup, CBN News, the Supreme Court.
Thanks, John. Pat, how do you think the Supreme Court's going to go on this?
I hope, Wendy, that they pass on this one. I don't know if standing is the hook that they'll use to hang their decision on, but I do think that an act of Congress, they certainly upheld the Obama health care law, which was a disaster. The Defense of Marriage Act was a bipartisan initiative and signed into law by a Democratic president. And I think for the Supreme Court to reach in and overturn that would be a great mistake. The same thing with an initiative in California that was passed by the majority of the people in the state. I think they ought to let the states work it out. And if the states change their minds along the way, fine, but it'll be democratic processes, not judicial fiat. Wendy?
Pat, the cost of some new health insurance policies could go up because of Obamacare. That's according to Health and Human Services Secretary Kathleen Sebelius. The Wall Street Journal reported her remarks. They came while insurance companies are working on the prices of their plans under Obamacare. The White House still says the new law will mean lower insurance prices in the future. Sexually transmitted infections are on the rise every year in the United States. That's according to the Centers for Disease Control. The CDC's new estimates show that there are about 20 million new infections every year. And that costs the healthcare system nearly $16 billion just in direct medical expenses. Half of all the new infections occur among young men and women. The CDC says there are more than 110 million total sexually transmitted infections in the U.S. Wow, 110 million, Pat.
I mean, Wendy, that's a lot of people. 110 million, 20 million in the demographic, probably between 18 and 34, the younger crowd. Somehow this sexual revolution isn't working. And what people don't understand is some of these, it's the human papilloma virus that is, causes cancer. And they're finding throat cancers that they've never had before because of our excitement about oral sex. I mean, it's unbelievable what's happening. And I mean, 110 million. I mean, and 20 million new cases in 1 year. I mean, sterilization. Brain damage. You can go down the list of the terrible things that these diseases cause. They're not fun. You say, well, just take a shot. Yeah, sure. But before long, they're going to be diseases that are not amenable to penicillin or any of the new drugs that they've got. But it's horrible. And the young people are saying, well, the Bible says you're supposed to be married before you have sex, but in the old days they could get married when they were 15. Now we have to wait till we're 25 or 30. So therefore, the Bible doesn't apply to us. Well, nonsense. Wendy?
Very scary, Pat. Well, people in Cyprus can finally get their own money out of the bank, but with strict limits. The nation's banks reopened to customers today for the first time in nearly 2 weeks, but they can only pull out a limited amount of money at a time. The move is designed to prevent runs on the banks. People also can't cash checks. The banks were closed after the government said it would seize money from high-end bank accounts to pay for a financial bailout plan. For now, excuse me, for people in Cyprus are just trying to figure out what they can and can't do with those new restrictions in place. Pat?
What they're telling all of us is be careful, get your money someplace where it's safe, because it can happen here.
The History Channel miniseries, The Bible, is winning big in the ratings. More than 10 million people tuned into each of the first 4 episodes. A new survey says 42% of American adults have watched at least one show. Of those, 25% aren't Christians. 69% who tuned in say the show taught them something about the Bible, something new about the Bible. The last episode airs on Easter Sunday. The Kentucky legislature has passed a bill allowing a Christians-only health care plan to resume operations in that state. A judge closed it down last year after objections from the Kentucky Insurance Department. The proposal would exempt the Medishare ministry from state insurance regulations, and participants in the plan would be required to sign a notice acknowledging they're not aware they're aware their claims may not be paid. The bill now goes to the governor. And remember, you can always get the latest from CBN News by going to our website at cbnnews.com.